Many of us are desperate to get back and see some live football again, but are football matches COVID superspreaders? James Reade of the University of Reading analysed football crowds from English games earlier this year to find out. James, welcome.
Hello, Tim.
Now, James, on a normal weekend, if there were football crowds, about how many matches are there in England and Wales? How many people are going to watch football?
We make it across the top 8 levels of English football. There's about 180 or so matches on average on a given weekend, and there's north of 500,000 people going along to these kinds of games.
And epidemiologists seem to have a consensus that football matches are super spreader events, don't they? Why is that?
Well, I think there's a few aspects of a football match, right? You know, even if you're in a stadium or ground that's sparsely attended, you're going to band together with your fellow team's fans, especially if you're at an away game. You're going to sing songs, and if lo and behold your team scores a goal, a last-minute winner, you're going to jump up and down and you're going to hug the guy next to you. Which, you know, these are all things. You also, of course, you're shouting lots of encouragement and maybe a little bit of abuse here and there. So these are all things that, as we understand, are ways in which viruses can spread.
Now, you analysed the impact of football crowds on the spread of COVID-19. What effects are you measuring here?
So what we decided was that one of the things that attracts a lot of economists to look at sport data is that it's very time disaggregated. There's lots of games taking place on a frequent basis. And it's very regionally disaggregated as well. So we drilled down here to local areas, and there's about 313 of them in England, and at least 2/3 of them have football taking place on a regular basis. So that's quite a wide spread of the country. And so what we did was we looked at the games taking place in these different local areas, and we looked at the number of cases, COVID-19, the number of deaths from COVID-19 and the number of deaths overall. In April, we looked at football matches in the first half of March before football was suspended. And we also looked at football matches in February as well to see if there was any effect of these mass outdoor gatherings on the subsequent spread of the virus.
But the problem is, of course, that people don't show their symptoms or have these bad effects immediately on the final whistle, do they? So how big a window did you allow to attribute the effects of the spread of COVID-19 to the football match?
Yeah, so our main specification was to look at the games in the first half of March and look at case rates and death rates in April. That therefore allows potentially this exponential spread that we see of the virus, where one person passes it to a number of people, and each of those passes it on to more people, and so on. So that was our main specification. We also then looked at games in February as well, and had a little bit of a look at case rates in May as well.
So, yeah, the big question: how big was the impact of football on the spread of COVID-19 in England and Wales?
I think it's bigger than we hoped it would be, actually, and somewhat more robust as well. So when we didn't control for any characteristics of a local area, it looked like what you'd imagine. Only really full stadiums led to the spread of the virus. So you can think back to the Liverpool Atletico Madrid match, for example. But then when we control for different characteristics of each of these local areas, so the population density, the age profile, the ethnic profile, income levels as well, and also number of football clubs in that area, then things changed a little bit. And we found that any match, regardless of how full it was consistent with an extra 6 cases per 100,000 people, an extra 2 COVID-19 deaths per 100,000 people, and an extra 3 overall deaths per 100,000 people. So as I say, larger than we'd have hoped, to be honest.
And of course, one of the aspects of football in England and Wales and in other similar countries that have a similar culture is that fans will travel to away matches, and sometimes they'll travel hundreds of miles to away matches. Were you able to track the impact of away fans on spreading COVID-19.
Yeah, so just as we could code up where the home team was located and therefore count up the matches in a local area, we could also do the same for the away team as well. So we could say, well, the away team, Liverpool v Bournemouth, Bournemouth's the away team. Therefore, what did cases look like for the amount of football matches taking place involving teams from that area? So away matches as well. And it looks like the effect is just as much, if not slightly bigger, for away teams. And that kind of makes sense, I guess, if you think about, as you mentioned, the way in which away fans get to games. They'll huddle with their mates in a small car and drive down the motorway. They'll maybe go on public transport in close spaces, and on the train they'll sing songs with their mates. All these kinds of ways in which we've learnt from the evidence over the last few months is the way in which the virus can spread.
Now, I would have thought this was just a big match problem where the grounds are packed out, that there are tens of thousands of fans. It sounds from what you're saying that this isn't the case, and that the super spreader effect of football crowds goes down to those smaller games as well.
It looks like that. So as I say, when we controlled for the different characteristics of each local area, then each match, regardless of how full it was, because we have the number of people that went to a game, the attendance, and we also have the capacity of each stadium as well. And so when we looked at the how full a stadium was, that really didn't actually make any difference. These numbers, 6, 2, and 3, seem to hold up quite steadily across the range of capacity utilization, so to speak. And the way in which we think that might actually be the case, because obviously when you find results that surprise you, you then start to make this post hoc rationalization. And the way in which that makes sense is, to me, is that, well, fans congregate. Even if the game isn't very densely populated, the stadium, you'll sit or you'll stand with your fellow supporters in a really relatively close area and sing songs and support the team. If it's a big stadium, you'll go beneath onto the concourse, you'll use the bathrooms, the toilets, you'll buy refreshments, maybe a pint. And even if it's a really small game, so my local team did cut town, I'll go along there and you'll go into the clubhouse and you'll get a pint, because that's one of the nice things about it. So there are certainly, while football is a mass outdoor event, and lots of the protests over the summer led us to believe that mass outdoor events are less of an issue than mass indoor events, there are aspects of a football match that is still indoor or in closed spaces where it would appear the virus can spread.
Now, often on Vox Talks, we ask our interviewees to be policymaker for a day, but instead I'm going to promote you to be Minister of Sport. And so, James, if you were telling me when I could go back to watch a live game again, when would you say? How soon is it going to be safe?
Well, the thing to say is, of course, that what we're looking at is matches that took place before we knew what we know now about COVID-19. So we know now more about how it spreads in certain types of situations. And so a bit like workplaces, a bit like my university, has changed dramatically over the past few months. We now have one-way systems everywhere and lots of stickers everywhere telling us what we can and can't do. Lots of seating areas have been fenced off. You can't sit there and all this kind of stuff. Well, we can adapt the way that we do things to make them, if you like, a bit more COVID safe or a bit more COVID secure. So my sense is that we ought to be able to go back to sports, get sports events sooner than these kinds of headlines, slightly scary numbers suggest, because we can do things to try and avoid those pinch points where fans might collect together in an enclosed space. We might require that fans turn up in intervals at the game rather than everyone turning up for 3 p.m., for example. We might simply close down the concourses and fans have to file in through the front of the stadium or something different. There ought to be a lot of ways in which games can be made a bit more, or significantly more, COVID safe. And I think that's what was being aimed for with the pilot events that were taking place. With the pilot events, you can trial some football matches. Cambridge had 1,000 fans going along. And then you can see if there's any effect of that a little bit down the line. So my sense is that, I hope we can go back to football matches before the pandemic is out, provided that we are very conscious of the risks of doing so if we go back to football matches and assume that everything is back to normal again.
Because, of course, the nightmare scenario for football fans and, of course, for football clubs that rely on the revenue is that if this becomes endemic, then it might be an end to those packed crowds that are typical of watching football, and that's part of the enjoyment, isn't it?
Absolutely. I very much look forward to going back and hearing the roar of a crowd, even if it is the away fans when they scored again against my team. Nonetheless, that noise of the crowd, cheering on the team, just the events, just the noise, and the synthetic noise that they pipe in when they're showing on TV these empty games isn't the same. There's something quite unique about it, and obviously we've been doing it around the world and certainly in England for well over 100 years. And indeed, lots of football clubs in the Football League and the National League and below rely on people coming through the door paying to watch the football match that's taking place. And if nobody can do that, then that creates a serious problem for a lot of football teams. My sense is that this needn't be the end for packed football grounds, because we had a pandemic in 1918, 1919, Spanish flu, which took a lot of lives. But then after that, we returned to football, and we had some of the biggest crowds recorded in football history in the interwar and the post-Second World War period. So I don't think this need be the end of packed football grounds. But of course, we do still need that structure still in place. So if it so happens that football clubs go out of business, Macclesfield Town being one, their stadium is on the market to be sold. If that gets sold to property developers and is turned into a different use of the land, well, then lots of that infrastructure is gone. Lots of that structure is gone. So my sense is that there needs to be some kind of protection in place, be it government, be it some way in which the Premier League disperses more of the money that comes into the game via television contracts. It's to some extent it's immaterial which way it comes, but there's going to need to be some kind of support.
Well, we've got to cross our fingers and hope that and hope that something does can happen, because it's a huge part of our culture and a huge part of the lives of a lot of people. James, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like your shirt, by the way. Which shirt is it?
Oh, it's Oldham Athletic. It's a shirt from the 1990s, late 1990s.
You must be a committed fan in that case.
Yes, it's an addiction, I think, and there's no rational explanation for it.
The paper's called Mass Outdoor Events and the Spread of an Airborne Virus, English Football and COVID-19, and the authors are Matthew Olzak, James Reade and Matthew Yeo. It's in Covd Economics 47. Thanks for watching. You'll find more new research on the impact of COVID-19 in Covd Economics, which is of course free and open access at CEPR.org.